Hello and welcome to Indus Special. I'm Meshal Malik. Aung San Suu Kyi, the state councillor of Myanmar, has experienced a fall from grace. The latest award she has been stripped of is the Freedom of Edinburgh Award. Previously, Amnesty International revoked its highest honour award. They claim that Aung San Suu Kyi has demonstrated a shameful betrayal of the values she once stood for. Let's take a deeper look into Aung San Suu Kyi's evolution from a human rights activist to a woman who has overseen one of the most horrifying instances of ethnic cleansing in modern history. We're joined by Hussein Naqi. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Yes.
Sir, so first off, I'd like to start off from Aung San Suu Kyi's evolution. How did she turn from this emblem of democracy into this person who has carried out such a repressive regime against her minorities?
Yes, she was one of the few female human rights activists and fighters who went to prison and challenged the authorities, particularly the military. But unfortunately, she, I think her aim was main objective was not to lead the civil society or the values of the rights values, the values associated with the fundamental rights of the people. So, and she was, it appears that she was after political power, and once she got that power, she found that the military is continues to hold reins of power, and she surrendered to them. That was very unfortunate. We, as because she belonged to Asia, our continent, and once Burma was also a part of when we were part of the British colonial empire. So Burma was also along with us. So we had some special relations with Burmese people, and Rohingyas definitely are citizens of Burma, even if they migrated to that country about 100 years ago. Some of them must have, as it appears. But now that they were citizens of Burma or Myanmar, they should have been given those rights and autonomy in their region, because Burmese struggle.
Do you think Aung San Suu Kyi has failed to provide those basic rights?
Yes, she had to. She should have. And she knew what the rights are. She was one of the, you can say, heroes of freedom struggle in about 20 years ago, 30 years ago. She was one of the very notable names amongst those who were struggling for the freedom of, for their democratic rights, for the people's right against military rule and against authoritarian regime in Burma. But subsequently, I think because I think she was not so much for the democratic values as she was for, it shows that she had an hunger for political power, and because of that, she surrendered before the military regime, which is quite
Mr.
strongly...
Naqi, we're also joined by Masood Kareem, a journalist from Bangladesh. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I'd like to carry on forward with what Mr. Naqi was talking about. Aung San Suu Kyi has seemed to fallen into the military leadership. Do you agree with that?
I will say that if you look at the Burmese administrative system, it is not fully democratic or fully military at this moment, because despite the Aung San Suu Kyi is elected in democratic way, but many of the power controlled by army, as because the some reserve seats have in the parliament for armies, and armies have the key ministry control. You can look at the border ministry or interior ministry or defense. Everything is under army. So Aung San Suu Kyi has not absolute power to change this power structure, despite she is elected by democratically elected. And another thing is that Aung San Suu Kyi's mindset is not the same as she was before. And she is
Mr.
not
Kareem,
now
but what is the reason for such a dramatic shift in her mentality? She was a human rights activist, and now she's turned into a person who's responsible for this genocide.
Because she is now democratically elected, and most of the people are Buddhist. If we look at the Buddhist society, and there are some elements they are very aggressive, and they have the huge popular support. So she as a political leader, she wants the political support rather than the soft corner to the minorities like Rohingyas. And many of these Buddhist people, they do not have any sympathy to the Muslim minorities like Rohingyas. So she is counting the votes. So she has changed her stand. Now she is in line with the military because she wants to take the power at the moment. And I think has a strong influence by Chinese. So China is backing the army, and also Suu Kyi by Western powers. So she wanted to be a balance of the two external powers. So she is in line with the army. So she is not going just like before she was a human rights activist. She has the sympathy to the repressed people. At this time, she is not even protesting the genocide or the crime against humanity.
Mr. Naki, I'd like to take this question to you. Do you think Aung San Suu Kyi was successful in fooling the world previously of being someone who championed diplomatic values and now being the complete opposite? How did she gain so many awards? This is a woman who's won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Because when she was in a struggle, her struggle was recognized because she was fighting against the oppressive forces in her country. So that is why she was receiving awards. As in our case, Asma Jahangir also won several awards because of her struggle. She did not aspire for power, and Aung San Suu Kyi aspired for power, and once she became part of the power structure, she went with the army, and with the majority of Myanmar's population. Rohingyas are unfortunately very unfortunate people who are not even getting proper, you can say, status as refugees in other countries where they have reached, for instance, in both in Bangladesh and in India. They should be treated as refugees. As far as Aung San Suu Kyi is concerned, she has relented a bit, and now she is, because of the international pressure and international outcry about the concerned international community. So she has relented a bit, and she has promised Bangladesh that she will be taking them back. So I think it should be managed by UN, and it should be supervised by independent, you can say, body constituted under UN Ejaz to rehabilitate the Rohingyas, and they should be
We'll get to the
accepted.
process of repatriation in just a bit, Mr. Nakki. But before that, I'd like to ask Mr. Karim, do you believe that the international pressure placed on Aung San Suu Kyi, she has relented from her position? She is now changing her tactics. Do you think she has changed in her approach?
No, not wholly, but she should be taken on her face value, and UN should arrange the return of Rohingyas from the countries where they are and where they still did not get the status of refugees. Because neither Bangladesh nor in India, some parts of India, they are there. None of them have accepted them as refugees.
But how much, Mr. Karim, how much can we take at face value? Because the UN did conclude that the environment in Myanmar is not yet conducive to allow these Rohingya Muslims to return back home. In fact, we had another incidence of violence today where authorities in Myanmar seized a boat carrying 93 Rohingya fleeing displacement camps from the western province. So the situation there doesn't seem to have changed. So can Aung San Suu Kyi actually claim that people should take her for the claims she's making at this moment?
It is a voluntary repatriation process which is working in Bangladesh and Myanmar, but the basic questions has not been resolved, particularly the citizenship. The Rohingyas have no citizenship in Myanmar, so they cannot want basic rights there, and the Rohingyas have witnessed the brutality. They have killed the Burmese armies, and the Buddhists have killed the people. They have burned the houses. They have seen the rape, so that they are very worried and scared. So they cannot. They refuse to go back despite the initiative taken by the Bangladesh government to send back. But Bangladesh government cannot send them back by forcefully. It is a voluntary repatriation process and involving the national affairs. So I think Myanmar government have to prove that they have prepared the ground, credible ground, recognizing the citizenship of the Rohingyas for their approval.
Mr. Nakki, I'd like to move on and ask about how Aung San Suu Kyi's position has in fact changed, because earlier she said that these Rohingya Muslims burned their own houses, that claims of rape were made up. She went on record to make these claims. So do you think that she has changed her position now?
It is very clear that all people who hold power, they always accuse the victims. So how is it possible that I'll burn my own home? Unless something was being done by her forces, by Myanmar forces. This happened because they did all this violence. So, and as far as Bangladesh is concerned, it is already an overpopulated country, and it will be very difficult for them to have, people from Myanmar and to people who belong to that country, and she should not only take them, but I think UN will have to station its forces in Myanmar and to see their rehabilitation and their return, because even now they need UN help, and they are getting some UN help. But I think UN will have to station its forces in Myanmar, in the area which belongs to the Rohingyas. So that should be done. As far as Aung San Suu Kyi is concerned, she is under tremendous pressure. I think moral pressure is there, because no country is ready to use forces against what she has done and it is not done in the present times.
Mr. Nakki, why isn't any country placing more diplomatic pressure, and why aren't they
As far as
intervening?
there is enough diplomatic pressure. Awards given to someone are not so easily withdrawn. And it was actually, she was, I'll say, unrobed, and she was condemned by the whole international community. So pressure, as far as diplomatic pressure is concerned,
That's there.
all countries are putting their pressure.
Okay.
But UN will have to take more stringent step, and that is to station its forces. It can organize forces from Asian countries who can understand the language there, and they should be stationed in that region which belongs to Rohingya, where they belong. They should get back to their countries.
Mr. Naki, but I want to understand this a little better. The UN being stationed there would still not, it would perhaps prevent violence being inflicted against this community. However, there are some legalities that I'm not sure if the UN can circumvent in this case. For example, they operate as a sort of an enclave in Myanmar. They have to accept national verification cards. Their mobility is extremely restricted. So it's not just about violence, it's also about assimilation. So how would the UN make sure that that happens?
The question of assimilation will remain unsettled. The ASEAN can move in, because ASEAN and I think in ASEAN, two major Muslim countries are part of ASEAN. It is Indonesia as well as Malaysia. And they have enough, I think, pressure and capacity and clout in that region that they should use their influence. Because these three countries, Bangladesh, Malaysia, and Indonesia, they have substantial Muslim population. And there is also a minority Muslim population in Thailand. They all can exert, I think, their pressure. They should take the initiative, and they should persuade both the UN and also the military-dominated regime in Myanmar to first accept them and then protect them, and till they protect them, I think it will not be impossible for ASEAN countries to contribute to the UN forces and they should also take up this issue because
Mr. Karim, I'll take the same. I'll put the same point to you. How do you think that the Rohingya Muslims, once they return back to the place that the world calls their home, can be better assimilated into the community?
Because the community is not willing to go back at this moment, because the Burmese authorities are not very sincere, or the military or Aung San Suu Kyi's government, they are not sincere at all. If you look at back in the 2005, they have verified some, and finally they have not taken back. This time it looks like I watched, because the key issues has not been resolved, particularly the safety and security of the Rohingyas, and also the citizenship.
Mr. Karim, I'm sorry, I didn't understand you there. Did you say that the key issues have been resolved or have not been resolved?
Not been resolved.
Okay.
Because they are not sure about their security. If they go to back and there is no guarantee to again torture or crack down on them, so they are not willing to go back. And also the citizenship, the basic rights, they are saying for a long time, even they do not recognize them as Rohingya. They say them Rakhine Muslim and other terms, but they do not say them Rohingyas. If some community themselves say they are Rohingyas, but Burmese authority is not recognized. So they are it looks like I was as the international pressure is mounted on the Burmese authorities and also the ICC, the International Criminal Court, showing that the generals who are involved in the genocide, they will be tried, and other Chinese involvement, so that they are looking, they are very, very sincere. But actually they are not sincere. They have not even implemented the Kofi Annan Commission recommendation. If everybody wants the implementation of the recommendation, but there is no sign of implementation of the recommendation. So it is a huge burden for Bangladesh to hold the 1 million Rohingyas for a long time. So I think that the regional countries like China and India, the regional neighbor of Burma, should put pressure on Burmese authorities to resolve the issues, and also the UN Security Council has the division on the issue, as China and Russia is against putting too much pressure on Burma, and other three countries are taking a stand to put pressure. So
Mr. Karim, could you please explain a little about the issue of citizenship for the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar? There is this very distinct issue of national verification cards, and that is one of the primary claims of the Rohingya Muslims, that they do not feel that card allows them to be assimilated and to be acknowledged as complete citizens of the state. What can you tell us a little more about that?
No, because they have the documents of living long times, that their forefathers living in the Rakhine state, and also they have the residential card. Some of them have the residential card, some have burned also, and some they have the residency before 1982, and the military government has cancelled the citizenship, and they have the parliament members even. They have the Burmese radio program in Rohingya's language, but they have destroyed everything, and now they are the stateless people. So they have the if there is no citizenship, if there is no guarantee of security in their homeland, how they can return back where the brutality happened? 3,000 people have been killed brutally, and every village have been burned, and the rape and other incidents happened here. So they are scared about this, and they cannot go back at this time. So they are not willing. So that they have to, Burmese authority have to prove that they are being safe here, recognizing the Rohingyas as the citizens of Myanmar.
Mr. Karim, 700,000 Rohingya Muslims have been set to flee Myanmar. Can you tell us a little about the situation in Bangladesh in terms of how many people came in to the borders as refugees and how many people are there in the camps at this moment?
At this moment, 1 million Rohingyas are in the camps, and some people are outside. Nearly 1.1 million Rohingyas are in Bangladesh, and what I heard that there are 500,000 in Myanmar in their internally displaced camp, IDP camp, and the Burmese are not allowing the aid workers. So it needs to make a confidence-building measure. If you do not allow the UNHCR and other aid workers in Rakhine State, how they can go back? So in Bangladesh, it is very tough. Bangladesh is a densely populated country. It is very tough to host a long time a huge number of Rohingya people, and the number is increasing day by day.
Mr. Naki, the figure that Mr. Karim just told us is much higher than the outside world knows of. He says that there are 1 million, approximately 1 million Rohingya Muslims in Bangladeshi camps at this moment. What can you tell us about the dissemination of information within the state of Myanmar? We know that there is a crackdown on media regularly. How can we actually know about the on-ground situation better?
In my view, the practical side of the situation is that these Rohingya Muslims, because now the international community's focus is on them, And once it is that way removed, like those of people from Afghanistan, then it will be very difficult for them to return. So I think it is time for them to return. And as far as I mentioned, these three Muslim countries which can exert their pressure, including Bangladesh, including Indonesia and Malaysia, they should exert their influence that Myanmar regime should actually take measures for their security. But Rohingyas should also make an effort because it is not that they are, isolated, or because Muslims in Myanmar, I think they were also trying to agitate for some kind of independence and coming out of Myanmar. That always creates problems for because in the present times when colonialism is over, it is very difficult for nations, even if they become a nation in themselves, it will be very difficult for them to get a country carved out of Myanmar. So now that the focus is on them, the Rohingya leadership should be persuaded by, I think there are diplomatic missions of Indonesia, Malaysia, and then the government of Bangladesh itself. They should talk to their leadership that it is the best time for them to return to their land, to their homeland, and these countries should ensure that the Myanmar regime is not involved in, because unless the regime was involved, it would not have happened that they had migrated. It is not the numbers, I think, that is as important, 700,000 on a million, because it is difficult to take account when borders are so, you can say, actually such open borders and not so difficult borders to enter into another country. So I think the best option for Rohingyas presently is to return to their countries and take their homes back, their lands back, and they should also make an effort to assimilate in that nation, because they are part of the Myanmar nation, and they have been there for 100 years. This issue developed, I think, lately. It is, that kind of conflict.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hussain Naqi. We'll have to take a short break. Thank you for joining us for this segment. When we return, we're going to discuss this issue further. Stay with us. Hello and welcome back to Indus Special. We're in conversation about the ongoing crisis of the Rohingya Muslims. We've been joined by Asif Munir, who is a representative of UNHCR. Thank you for joining us. The first question, Mr. Munir, that I would like to ask is that the Rohingya Muslims have been told that they must issue a smart card, and they have widely resisted this because they feel like it will make them vulnerable. What can you tell us more about the situation?
Yeah, it's because of the ongoing crisis that they have faced for not just for recent years, but for many years. And the smart card that you talk about is basically their identity card that has been issued to them earlier on when they were still in Myanmar, and that actually denies their identity. It identifies them as outsiders, as Bengalis, coming from parts of Bangladesh, which has been many years ago, some of them several generations, which denies them the identity of a Rohingya. The term Rohingya is not recognized inside Myanmar. So it's a question of identity. and they don't have any citizenship status as a Myanmar national. So that has not changed. There has not been any clarification from the Myanmar side, either to the Rohingya population or to the world or even to the Bangladesh authorities in terms of the basic claim of their right to self-identity and their citizenship rights.
In fact, what it was said was that once they return, they will have to accept national verification cards for their mobility to be redeemed.
Yeah, and that national verification card does not include them as a Rohingya, as their own sort of identity. So
can you tell us a little about the history of that?
Yeah. So the thing is that because they have been persecuted for many years, and they have left their country over the last many years. At least from the 70s, they've been coming to Bangladesh or going to other countries, and more so in the recent times. But the atrocities have continued as well, in a smaller scale, even in the last few days or months. So there has not been any improvement. So one issue is about the citizenship issue. The other is about the right to life. Many of them have escaped, sheer death or severe kind of atrocities and come across the border. So there has not been any assurance on that. Only the physical infrastructure work has been ensured, and this issue of the national verification card. In terms of their social security, in terms of their right to life, nothing has been clarified by the Myanmar authorities. We're not sure if it is there or not. It has not been clarified, and especially in terms of the Rohingya themselves. The refusal to go back is because they don't have any clear understanding of what is awaiting for them on the other side.
Do the Rohingya Muslims have any agency at this point? Because earlier this month, when we were hearing claims about repatriation, there was a list coming out of 2,000 Rohingya Muslims who were set to return. And many of them did not know that their names were on the list. So in this situation, is it just governments dealing with a group of people?
You're very right. To some extent, that is the case, and that has been sort of criticized by the UN agencies and other humanitarian agencies. But it's also true that they are to neighboring countries. They have a right to sort of look at solutions in terms of dialogue. But what has happened is that this process has been going on for the last 1 year. There has been very limited involvement of international agencies or human rights groups, as well as Rohingya themselves. Now, in terms of Rohingya themselves, they don't have a kind of like a proper representative. I mean, they do have like small community leaders, but not kind of a spokesperson as such. And that has also been like for many years they didn't have a possibility to grow as as in terms of leadership and all that. Some of them who had that have actually escaped, and they're part of the Rohingya diaspora across the world now. So it's very difficult for them in the camp to organize and have a collective voice. Yes, when the list came out, it was not officially coming out to them all the time. Some of them heard that their names are in the list, and they were actually scared that they might be forced. Now, the Bangladesh authorities did clarify that nobody will be forced, but there was a gap in terms of communication, in terms of really going into a dialogue with the community, especially those who were in the list. The other issue was that there has not been any sort of representation from Rohingya or kind of trying to arrange a representative group to go and visit and actually see what the situation is. The only thing that happened was that in the last few months there was Myanmar high official representatives coming to Dhaka, and they went to Cox's Bazar and they met with a group of Rohingyas and tried to convince them. But as such, this is a very authoritarian regime. It's very difficult for the communities to really trust what is being said to them verbally.
Mr. Munir, what happened when this these representatives went and tried to convince these Rohingya Muslims?
Well, in Dhaka, there was a discussion about the bilateral sort of arrangements, more, I would say, the hardware arrangements in terms of the actual transit points where people would gather, how they will be transferred from one border to the other, where will they stay, which is probably inside a camp-like situation. So these hardware arrangements were discussed bilaterally between the two agencies, two authorities. UN agencies had been, at the last minute, provided a list of the returnees, and they were requested that people are consulted if they're willing to go. So this was at the very last minute. The other thing that happened was the delegation from Myanmar, they visited the camp, at least one area of the registered official camp, where there was a mix of Rohingya representatives from different blocks of the camp. And some of them new arrivals, some of them older arrivals. And I was not physically present there, but I've heard from those who were, including some Rohingya representatives, that they had their slogans and their banners in terms of what are the conditions that they would sort of need to be fulfilled for them to go back.
Can you tell us a little about those conditions that they are advocating for?
I don't remember all the verbatim, but basically it is about their citizenship rights and for them to be able to go back to their own areas and their homesteads. Apparently, most of them don't have the homesteads anymore. They have been, burnt out. But whether they would be able to go back to their own localities and the right to sort of self-identity as an ethnic group as Rohingya. So that was the basic demand that they had. But without the assurance of these, they cannot and do not want to go back. Although they still feel, no matter how long they live in another country, they do consider that to be temporary. And their dream is always, of course, to go back to their own country, which they consider as Myanmar.
Mr. Munir, do you think that these Rohingya Muslims, when they are being told to repatriate, you have told us that the general sentiment is that of fear, but do you think any one of these has come forth and willingly, voluntarily wants to return back home?
Not in the present condition, but of course, people are not sure, absolutely sure what's happening or the assurances that are given, how much they can trust it or not. Now, people do take advantage of that. So what we have heard is that there has been sort of some soft coercion from different groups of Rohingya among themselves who feel that they need to take a stronger stand. So there may have been certain people, even in the recent list, who were unsure that what to do about it. And they have been sort of approached and sort of, in terms of that probably raised their fear factors a little bit more as well. But the fact remains that whether they are willing to go or not, there's no clear information in terms of what's happening. I mean, in the age of,
In fact, there is a great crackdown on activists and journalists in Myanmar. One of the stories that was highlighted was the arrest of 2 Reuters journalists who tried to report on what was happening. So we can see that there is a complete crackdown of information coming out of Myanmar as well.
Of course. But also, like different human rights agencies and even official visits that had been allowed by the UN, observers, that had also reported. So there has been a consistent report of some of the things that have happened over a period of time. Yes, in terms of the 2 journalists, that has been a case that there are charges against them. But apart from that as well, still word did get around. And even, in terms of the reality of the borders, both like Bangladesh and Myanmar is separated with this Naf River. And like I was saying, in the age of sort of the internet and all that, and the mobile phones, people are able to communicate. So having said that there's no clear information, that it is not so safe, people have relatives and people that they know across both borders. So
of course.
It's not too far in terms of the two borders, Bangladesh and Myanmar. So it's not impossible to know that it's not very safe to go back.
That is a very troubling situation. Mr. Munir, there were claims made by an official from Myanmar that NGOs do not want for the repatriation of these Rohingya Muslims. Have you heard about this claim? And if you have, do you know if there's any weight behind it?
There is that rumor. There's no official sort of investigation or reporting on that. But at least, the way the operation or the humanitarian work is undertaken there, it's at the moment, at least in the last 1 year, very well coordinated with the government very much in charge, but also the involvement of UN, international NGOs, local and national NGOs. So there is a platform and everybody knows who's doing what. But at the ground level, if, for instance, field workers of some NGOs, they feel threatened that, if the repatriation goes on well, there would be there would be job cuts and all that. That can happen in sort of like, one-off incident. But I would say that claim is not well-founded.
What has the pressure been on the Bangladeshi government ever since there was such an influx of refugees, especially in terms of their economy?
There has been sort of a lot of speculation, especially after the last influx in August 2017. I think the last 1 year, there has not been sort of, one of the speculation was the pressure, the economic pressure, especially among the local communities. The other issue was about the deforestation, and also the third issue about the law and order, and especially rise of extremism in the area. Fourth was the issue of the trafficking. Now, in terms of the trafficking, yes, to some extent that has happened or have started. Trafficking gangs have been very active, especially now and in the dry season. Both the risk for both Bangladeshi as well as Rohingyas in and around the camps. In terms of extremism, not very well founded, although some religious groups have been active at different times. But whether it's the involvement of the international community or the government, that is sort of a low. There has not been any major reporting on that. In terms of the local economy, yes, some pressure. But yes, for the more lower income group, like people who depend on daily wages, they have been mostly hard hit in the local areas. But as time goes by, both for Rohingya and Bangladeshis, they try to migrate internally from the particular area as well. Because the security and sort of there's no clear border areas for the camps. Authorities try to manage as they can, but people do move around.
So there's been a lot of mass migration within Bangladesh ever since this influx?
No, not mass migration, but there has been sort of stray incidents of people either trying to use the sea route, Bay of Bengal route to migrate to, or take boat migration, irregular migration to Malaysia, but these are not in a large scale, and of course to other districts of Bangladesh. Whether authorities accept that or not, that is a reality, but not in a mass scale, not in a large scale, because there is some kind of monitoring among the agencies, and at least a lot of the humanitarian support is very well organized and being provided in the local areas. And now it has also kind of covers the local communities as well, not just the Rohingyas in that particular area. So for people to move out, there has not been any big pressure, but the trend has been to remain in the area. So that economic pressure is not so much felt. But in terms of deforestation, yes, because at least in those communities that they have been sort of the camps have been housed, it's very difficult to really, people do have to live and use the local firewood and all that. So that has.
Mr. Asif Munir, we just have to go toward break. When we return, we'll discuss this further. Hello and welcome back. We're discussing the Rohingya crisis, and we're also in discussion with Abdul Ghaffar Aziz from the Jamaat-e-Islami Pakistan party. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mr. Aziz, I'd first like to ask you, what has been the response of the Muslim world to this crisis?
It's very unfortunate that this catastrophic and humanitarian situation started since decades, and hundreds of thousands of people are facing all these challenges, and millions have been fled out of their homeland, and still there are new refugees camps in Bangladesh who received about 700,000 innocent Muslims from
Almost 1 million, we were told
Rakhine.
earlier.
Yes, now, yes, maybe it is increasing, maybe weeks by weeks. But very unfortunately, all Muslim and even the global community, world community, kept silent. There are just empty statements from different platforms, starting from United Nations, Security Council, OIC, Arab League, and other regional Muslim organizations, but there are no concrete steps supporting all these.
What have the measures been taken by the OIC, for instance?
If you remember, I think it was in 2012, and there was an urgent meeting of OIC held in Mecca. At that time also, this crisis was there, and they agreed that these Muslim countries jointly, they will try to at least convey the message to Myanmar's government and concrete steps to involve the global community to stop these atrocities there. And they will pressurize the Rohingya, the Myanmar government economically, politically, and diplomatically. But single step was not taken in that regard. Even if you see the response of surrounding and neighboring countries, even just last month, there was a very weak statement of ASEAN summit took place, and
Yes.
they kept silent. And
No one discussed this issue.
No discussion. And even in Bangladesh, authorities are torturing them by issuing the statements that they may have to go back, and there's no place for them in Bangladesh, and even more refugees camps are required, but there is a ban on some NGOs which were striving to help these helpless people.
You mentioned that there has been no substantial steps taken by the Muslim world. Can you tell us a little more about why they aren't doing this, why there is such a strong hindrance from doing so?
Of course, atrocities are in each and every area of Muslim world. Of course, you are facing these challenges in Palestine and in Syria and in Yemen and in Kashmir and Afghanistan. Muslim world kept maybe senseless at this moment, and maybe the rulers they have out their priorities, and they have only one priority: how to keep their government and their rule, and how to keep their own people in jails or
Mr. Aziz?
under.
Mr. Aziz, you mentioned previously at the ASEAN summit, no country put this issue forth, but I believe that the Malaysian government did. They did confront Aung San Suu Kyi on this issue.
Yes, you can even mention the stance of Turkish government. Turkish president and his family, even his family members, they went to their camps, and Malaysian governments very rightly you said that they are also supporting in different platforms. But if you compare the required steps and the steps which have been taken by one or two governments, there is no comparison. And of course, when you see the number of these refugees and even the policy of Myanmar government. They are still forcing on their statement that they are terrorists and we are keeping our operations against the terrorists.
Mr. Aziz, that claim has been made by the Myanmar government too, that these are religious extremists and those are the ones they took action against. How much weight do you think there is behind this claim?
If they're right and if this is the reality, so it's very easy to open that area for journalists, for example, for the world community to see their atrocities and all these camps and terrorism and what they are committing crimes against humanity. But whole area is closed among and in front of each and every independent authority, including the media and including the international observers or even NGOs. No NGO can take any penny of assistance to that area. So these are just empty blames.
Mr. Abdul Ghaffar Aziz, I wish we could talk about this more, but of course what you have said is very insightful information. With that, we have to end the show. The ongoing crisis in Myanmar is extremely alarming. The world must come together and try to address it. We hope that the show today was helpful on shedding light into what's happening. See you tomorrow.